Hi, hey Russ here. Welcome back to my shop. Today I want to talk about my Styrofoam 2x4s again. If you've ever had a small shop, I was just talking to a guy that is just going to be moving into a new house, new to him. And he's going to set up an 8x16 area somewhere in his garage. Or maybe that's the size of his garage, I'm not sure. But it's 8x16 is going to be his workshop. And he was asking me, he says, I have no idea how I'm going to be able to cut 4 sheets of plywood in there. 8x16 is pretty small. There's no doubt about it. But actually, it's no big deal. If you use my Styrofoam 2x4s. Say, what are those? Well, obviously, you need to go back and watch my Styrofoam 2x4s. I did my original one back in April, I think, of 2017. And then I've done a couple of follow-ups showing you how to use them, little tips and tricks of using my Styrofoam. I find myself using them more and more in my shop ever since I made them. And it's just a piece of 1.5 by 3.5 inch piece of Styrofoam, and I glued a piece of 1/4 inch plywood to it with wood glue. And this thing makes this thing very durable. It doesn't break on me now, and quite honestly, I have used this thing and it still keeps on ticking. So I really like them. But now let's cut a piece of plywood. Before, if you had a bench, like here, I have my bench, but I do have to clear it off if I want to throw a sheet of plywood up here. It only takes me less than 10 minutes to do that. But there's an easier way, especially if you have a small shop like this gentleman was telling me he's going to have. You can still use this method that I'm going to show you using my Styrofoam 2x4s. Basically, I redid these rather than using those. I just made something real quick. And this is just, again, 3.5 by 1.5 inch piece of plywood. And I glued a 1x3, so it's 3/4 inches thick by 2.5, and I glued it to my Styrofoam. On the bottom end, I drilled a 3/4 inch hole, and I just used bench dogs 4 inches up from the bottom. The distance is arbitrary. You just want to give enough room for your saw to go out of the cut on your plywood at the bottom when you're cutting it. And you'll see more about that when I show you the setup. At the other end, whatever your surface that you're going to be using to hold your plywood placement, and I'm not talking about laying it on top, but let's say this is a countertop against the wall, and we're going to lean that plywood up against here at an angle so that we can cut it. So you want this piece with this board here on a hinge, you want it to be at least 1 inch above this surface. I have 1 inch here. Over there I actually have even more. And all that does is if I make this set up for 35 inches and I put it against something that's 34 inches, it still works because this pivots. If you're going to have one place only you do it, you can screw these to it, hard screwed to it so it doesn't move, and use it that way if you want. That's up to you. But the way this works is you just put this down flat on the table and put it so this is gently against here, and then when it pivots down it just touches while this is here, and you would clamp this piece in place right here, and this piece is not ready to use. You want to make sure, let me tip you down on my clamp, you want to make sure that clamp clears so that my plywood is on this surface. This clamp is not going to be hitting my plywood. That way it'll lay flat on here. So once I set all these up, then you can put a sheet of plywood up on there. Let me show you. I'm going to spin you around over here where I've got it set up on my table saw setup. Right here. And you can see I have 3 of them here, and I take them and I'm using this surface here that's flat, but it's 1 inch lower than my tabletop of my saw. And I can still use this surface even though this is 1 inch lower than my bench top that I put this on originally. All that does is by doing that is, as long as I make it the same distance out away from here, which means I'm referencing the back of this wood against here on all 4, and that gives me this so they're all even. And that makes everything nice and even. And then when I put that down against the floor, the angle is going to be a little bit more because this is slightly lower, but I can use it here instead of there by this being hinged. And all I do is that I then take this piece and I clamp it down. This thing is now ready for me to put plywood up there and cut it. So I take my sheet of plywood and I slide it over in front of them. If this, yes, I know, this is not a full sheet of plywood. I wasn't going to drag a full sheet of plywood over here to show you this. Just pretend this is a full sheet. If it was a full sheet, I would spread these out further so that it would support the full sheet. But what you do is you have these all leaning here. They're all equal now. I lift it up and put it on those dowels that's sticking out down there. So I lift it up, drop it down on there, lean it up against there, and I am now ready to cut this. In my case, I can take my track saw, set it up, and I'm ready to make my cut vertically. If I was cutting horizontally, I would get my clamps out, put my piece on this way, clamp it down, and then I would make a horizontal cut. So I can now cut this piece without any effort in either direction, or I could even just take and freehand cut with a jigsaw with it on here. If you want it to stay put, then take a couple of quick clamps and clamp one at the bottom and one from the top to kind of hold this in one or two places if you were worried, but I don't think you really have to. It's pretty sturdy. The other thing you want to watch out for, if you're making vertical cuts, then it's very important that you have 4 of these. Wherever your cut is, you want to have 2 of these on one side and 2 of these on the other side of your vertical cut. In other words, if I have a 4x8 sheet here, 8 foot long, and I set it on here, and I'm cutting at 30 inches, I want these 2 to be on this side of my 30-inch cut, and these 2 to be on this side of my 30-inch cut. So I quickly set them up, clamp them down, set my sheet up here, make my cut so I'm in between. If the cut you're making is on the end of your plywood and it's 6 inches wide, this 3.5 inches is enough to support without any problem at that point. If you have any doubts, then just clamp it down on this board, on this end of it, so that when you make your cut, this piece will still be held still. So you can clamp it. Just be aware that if you don't have 2 of these on each side of your cutting line, you may or may not be able to have that stable on there. So just keep that in mind. You always want to have 2 of these on each side if you can. The other thing you keep in mind is when I do horizontal cuts this way, I set my plywood up, I start cutting horizontally after I set up my track saw, and I start cutting horizontally. When I get partway through, I take a couple of ice picks like this, or scratch-alls, or whatever, something that fits into that cut curve. And I just stick that right in there, and then as I go further along, I put a second one in. These will help support that upper piece so that as you exit your cut, this thing isn't binding, trying to bind that blade. So that'll help hold it up. So if you're doing a horizontal cut, just keep a couple of ice picks close at hand. And I think that's about it. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory. After you've used it a couple times, you may see a couple ideas that I hadn't even thought about yet. Because this is, quite honestly, this is new to me too, thinking about this. The guy mentioned it to me. I thought about it for about a week and realized that my 2x4, my Styrofoam 2x4s are the ticket. And so I did this. If you have any questions, leave them below. Any comments, leave them below. If you like this video, please say so. More importantly, please come back again, because there's going to be lots more coming. Thanks. We'll talk to you soon.